The Resident Evil series has a pretty strange reputation when it comes to camera angles. Any type of camera angle that you can think of has probably been used in one of the games. And as could be expected, with the constant changing of camera angles in the series, this has created quite the divide between fans. When referring to the main series, I would divide them into three main categories. The first category would be the original trilogy, which contains the fixed camera angles and focuses mainly on puzzle solving and item management. The second group would be 4, 5, and 6, which are third person and focus mainly on action. And the final group would be 7 and presumably 8 based on what we've seen from the trailer. These two games are first person and they focus mainly on being a scary game. The first group of games are obviously the oldest, and their camera angles in turn are obviously the most dated. The fixed camera angles change as you move from room to room, and this is really off-putting for new players. It takes a while to get adjusted to the way the camera works, which is not something you really have to get used to in games nowadays. But you have to remember that back in 1996, Resident Evil was marketing itself as the survival horror game. And to do this, the developers used these fixed camera angles to limit what the player could see and in turn make them get more nervous about moving on to the next camera angle, since they couldn't see what was right in front of them. However, the main drawback to this camera angle is that the player isn't given the amount of control that they are given in third person and first person games. This is probably why the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake were made in a third person perspective. While it would have been cool to see the remake be fixed camera angle, the new third-person perspective gives the player complete control of which way they're looking, and this allows for more immersive gameplay and allows for aiming to be more reliant on the player's actual skill rather than just how the camera works in the game. So while I think that it's a really cool attribute to the Resident Evil series, the fact that the fixed camera angle was such a staple in the first three games, I understand why the remakes didn't follow suit, and this is the same reason why 4, 5, and 6 had to change up the formula as well. It's really hard for a series to stay relevant without mixing up their formula, and Resident Evil definitely mixed up their formula with their 4th and 5th and 6th installations. Obviously, they swapped to a third-person perspective, and the games focused more on action and shooting rather than puzzle solving and horror. And this can likely be attributed to the successful games of 2004, the year before Resident Evil 4 came out, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Halo 2, those were some of the biggest selling games of the year, and that's just what people wanted. People liked shooter games. And even more importantly, fixed camera angles were falling off, and obviously it worked really well. Resident Evil 4 is considered to be one of the greatest games of all time, and plenty of people say it still holds up today. I personally think the controls are a little wonky, and I think when the remake for that game eventually comes out, it should be overhauled a little bit, but I can still appreciate what it is. 5 and 6, however, aren't looked upon as fondly as 4, and it's interesting. They went more towards the action side, which 4 had already gone towards, but 5 and 6 took it to a whole nother level. But part of me feels like this is because of how long the games took to come out. I mean, 4 came out in 2005, and 6 didn't come out until 2012. To me, it almost feels like Capcom was really falling behind on what needed to be made at what time, and I don't know, it feels like 6 just had a build-up that didn't live up to expectations, even though I don't think it's a horrible game. One problem that I have with both Resident Evil 4 and 5 is that the third-person camera is not free at all. And what I mean by that is you can turn it right and turn it left, but it snaps back into place. The camera's always focused on the player's back, which is a stark contrast to the 2 and 3 remakes where you can move the camera all around. And in my opinion, this is the most annoying part of these games. The only way to move the camera properly, from my perspective, is you have to be running. And running in these games is typically holding down A or X on PlayStation. And this is very strange to me because I see this a lot in 4 and 5. You can't just walk. It's difficult to walk in these games because of how the camera works. It's hard to explain why, but if you played the games you would know that the only way to really feel comfortable moving around is running. Resident Evil 4 uses tank controls, which means you can't exactly strafe left and right. You just have to move forward and back and then use the run button to get more maneuverability. 5 doesn't exactly have tank controls because you can move left and right, but you're very stiff in your movement unless you're running. Resident Evil 6 has the most, you could say, modern movement. It's less takey and all, but it still doesn't feel very free. It's still a pretty stiff movement, but nowhere near as bad as 4 and 5. So while all three of those games had a similar perspective, the movement slowly became more and more modernized. And that brings us all the way to 2017 when Resident Evil 7 was finally released. RE7 is first person, and as you could expect, since it's such a modern game, it has very fluid controls. You have total control of where you're looking and which direction you're moving. The main complaint you see against this perspective is that it falls victim to a lot of typical horror game tropes that Resident Evil hasn't been known for. You get jump scares, which is pretty much a given in any first-person horror game, and that seems to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. However, this swap to first person was a good financial move for the franchise. 7 did really well, and from the looks of it, 8 and, if there will be a 9, are presumably going to follow suit with the first-person perspective. However, this doesn't mean all hope is lost for those who hate first-person Resident Evil games. The past 2 Resident Evil games that have come out have been remakes, and they have been in a third-person perspective. Like I mentioned before, this third person isn't like the third person in 4, 5, and 6. It's a brand new take on it. And I wouldn't be surprised if they attempt to go this direction with the Resident Evil 4 remake that's been rumored to come out in a couple years. The swap to this new third person worked really well for 2 and 3, but I'm personally not so sure it would work as well for Resident Evil 4, and I know a lot of people agree with that. It's a different type of game, and giving it the same treatment that 2 and 3 got might not be the best direction to take. But no matter what happens, I'm sure it'll be interesting. We all know that Capcom won't stick with first-person games forever, and surely the remakes won't be third-person forever. We'll eventually get some new, unheard-of camera angle, I'm sure, and as long as the Resident Evil series exists, I'm sure we'll be surprised with the next installation. So with all that said, what's your favorite perspective? Mine, personally, is the new remake style, just because of how it blends so nicely together with all the different styles. I feel like it's probably the pinnacle of all the camera angles we've seen so far, but I also really love the fixed, and I love first person. Not the biggest fan of the 4, 5, and 6 third person, but you know, it is what it is. But anyways, if you enjoyed the video, like it, and if you didn't enjoy it, you could still like it anyway, that'd be nice. But either way, have a good day.